For today, in the name of freedom, we take the battle to them.
Ladies and gentlemen, as of recording this, it is the 23rd of June, and that marks exactly 8 years since the release of Transformers The Last Knight. Now, back when I was doing my little review series leading up to Rise of the Beasts, I unfortunately did not get to review The Last Knight and Bumblebee. I believe Age of Extinction was the last movie that I got to review. And honestly, I have really been looking forward to doing one for The Last Knight, and what better day to do it than on the 8-year anniversary? And I am simply going to preface this by letting you know immediately that this movie was my most anticipated film of all time. I have stated countless times that Age of Extinction is one of my favorite movies of all time. Is it a movie that a film critic or like anyone who looks for a great piece of film will consider a great movie? No. It's just a badass action movie, and it is just so goddamn cool. And it has, in my opinion, or at least tied with Dark of the Moon, may be better for the best ending of a Transformers live action movie. Not only is Optimus's speech here probably the best he's ever had of the franchise, but just the possibilities for the sequel were just insane. Because, of course, you have the Dinobots being free, indicating that for the next movie, you can have the Dinobots be a much bigger part of it. And then, of course, you have Optimus going to find his creators. So we would finally meet the makers of the Transformers. We saw their hands in the beginning, but we never saw the actual creators. And then, of course, the biggest thing, which, what the hell, how did you not do this, was Galvatron. Of course, Age of Extinction did introduce the concept of the Transformium, and Megatron was brought back accidentally as Galvatron with that amazing "We shall meet again, Prime, for I am reborn." All of this adding to what could have been the coolest Transformers movie. Yes, I would say it could have been more badass than Dark of the Moon. Instead, we got Transformers The Last Knight. And I'm going to, be honest, I did not hate this movie as much. I actually think I grew to dislike it more over time. I wouldn't say I hate it, especially with given how the Transformers movies have been going recently. Not in terms of quality, but just in terms of direction, I'd say I actually really enjoyed The Last Knight when I watched it. Now, bear in mind, when I watched it, I was still like 10. I wasn't 11 yet. That's October. But I was still a small child, basically. And just, it was pretty cool, but nowhere near the level of Age of Extinction. So let's just start off with the opening scene. The opening shows King Arthur, Merlin, obviously all the knights, and then we are introduced to the Cybertronian knights, aka the knights that combine to form Dragonstorm. And this scene could have been so freaking cool. I remember the teaser trailer, and hell, even the trailer too, really showing off these knights. And my god, this looked like it would have been the coolest thing in the world. I think that the two best trailers for this movie, obviously trailer 3 was the coolest in my opinion. Like there's literally no competition. But the initial teaser trailer, I'll never forget how everyone just sat there in awe when B ran up behind Prime and Prime just slammed him to the ground and said, "Forgive me." And my god, I can't believe that wasn't in the movie, but man, that was an era. That was the definition of you had to be there. But I'm getting sidetracked, as I usually do because I talk a bunch. This whole thing of the knights helping the knights of Earth, I thought was an interesting concept. And honestly, you kind of need something different. Like, at this point, we're 4 movies in, onto the 5th one, introducing this concept of Transformers, being on Earth for a very long time, I think is absolutely awesome. But Transformers The Last Knight handles it in probably the worst way possible, where they literally just take the characters and just shove them into these random settings throughout history. And, there's one image of Optimus literally looking exactly like how he does in the '07 film when that truck wouldn't have been there. Like, Optimus wouldn't have scanned that truck at the time, so that doesn't make sense. Because remember, in the Bayverse timeline, they only come to Earth in 2007. So I don't really understand this whole thing of them going, oh yeah, let's just put Bumblebee in World War II, They really just did not give a shit in this movie. And then they were like, oh yeah, a clock killed Hitler. Like, what? What the? Like, that I can somewhat get behind, because I like it when movies tamper with real world events, to fit the plot of the movie. Like, one was in X-Men Days of Future Past, when Magneto was, when we learn why he was in jail, well, quote unquote jail, it's because he supposedly assassinated JFK. But in the movie, they explain that JFK was a mutant and Eric was trying to deflect the bullet. I like this when they implement things that happen in real life into the movies. Final Destination, I think it was 3, was a good example, because they used a certain incident with a plane and 2 buildings and was like, oh, this was death. This was death's design. But yeah, again, sidetracked. Shit. Let me just start off with some general things, 7 minutes into the video. The characters in this movie, I think, are some of the worst in the franchise. I would actually say the worst. Look, I know people didn't like the characters in Age of Extinction. I never really cared much for Shane, but I remember hating Tessa as a kid. But I actually really liked Cade. You may like or not like Mark Wahlberg, but I really liked Cade as a character. Did I just say Cade? Cade. But The Last Knight just makes him so weird and surrounds him with even weirder characters. Isabella with a Z, so freaking cool. She actually, in the marketing, seemed like a really cool character, because you have her say in, I think, trailer 3 or trailer 2, where she literally just goes, I'm gonna stay and I'm gonna fight them. And obviously we are thinking, oh my god, yes, we're finally gonna get the kids standing, like, they're gonna be involved with the war, they're gonna be fighting the Decepticons. Nope. She's talking about the TRF, just another useless military team. Which, let's just get it out the way, Captain Lennox does jack shit in this movie. I mean, he probably does as much as he did in the previous movies. Well, except for '07, he killed Blackout. But here, it's like, okay, you brought this guy back when he wasn't in the 4th one. What are you going to do with his character? He'll be there, It was questionable. It was a questionable decision. Speaking of questionable decisions, giving Cade the long hair. They always do this in movies. When you take when there's a male character who's carried over to the next movie, they are quote unquote badass and they get long hair. And then with the female characters, they're like, oh yeah, they're badass and they get short hair. Like freaking the Dr. Andrews, whatever, from Godzilla vs. Kong. And you get to GXK and she got short ass fucking hair. And God, that looks so goddamn ugly. And the rest of them, apart from Anthony Hopkins' character of Sir Edmund Burton, apart from him, you just don't have any really important characters here. All of them are just sort of throwaways. Which, speaking of which, Anthony Hopkins, you have Anthony Hopkins, a freaking Oscar-winning actor. you Hannibal Lecter himself. And this man is just chilling. He's just chilling. He doesn't really give a shit as to what's going on. The character is just so weird and funny, like unironically, but I don't know what it is. I really don't know. But probably my favorite line of his is when he goes, "Yes, but you want to know, don't you, dude? Why they keep coming here to Earth?" I loved that one. And I mean, his death was like fairly sad. I actually remember finding it like heartbreaking back then, like in the cinema. Now I'm like, cool. He did get killed by Megatron, though, to be fair. Which, yeah, let's talk about the Transformers. I think talking about the Autobots is easier because there's less to talk about. So, Optimus in this movie was completely falsely advertised in the marketing because they put a huge focus on Nemesis Prime. The whole thing about The Last Knight was that Optimus met his creator and is now evil. And my god, I remember all of us theorizing as to what was going to happen. Was Bumblebee going to die? Especially with that one poster of him like just standing up and you can just see B's arm covered in dust there. And my god, we all thought B was going to die or come close to dying. And then you get to The Last Knight, the movie itself, and what happens with Prime? He spends like half the runtime just captured by Quintessa, and then he leaves because now he's Nemesis Prime, has one scene, and then boom, he's back to normal. Nemesis Prime was horrific in this movie. Optimus Prime, though, was goddamn awesome. Look, his entrance in Dark of the Moon will never be topped. That is still the peak of like character entrances, you know? You have that and you have Thor's entrance from Endgame. Oh my god. Those are on the same level. And then you get to The Last Knight where Prime just rides in on Dragonstorm, slides along the ground, like causes Infernicus to split up, and you get one of the sickest scenes in the franchise of when he goes, "Did you forget who I am?" And he just decapitates all of them in one foul swoop. And he's like, "I am Optimus Prime." And, you have, again, some great speeches. Absolutely amazing speeches. I believe this is the first movie where we get a motivational speech from Prime before the ending. I can't really think of any from the previous films where he gives one before the end. Because here, you have the whole, like, after the Account of the Ages and, Etched into the Cosmos, that speech. And then obviously you have the ending of, Autobots, it's time to come home. So, cool, I guess. I guess that's something that The Last Knight has going for it. Bumblebee is Bumblebee. He gets that random ability of being able to split himself apart and put himself back together again, which, that is so fucking stupid. Crosshair's being a dick as usual, but I still love him. Hound is the absolute goat. Drift is completely sidelined in this movie. He's a freaking Mercedes SLS and he does fuck all. Like, come on, man. Even the baby Dinobots do absolutely nothing. They have like 2 scenes of just a character holding them, and then that's it. They do absolutely nothing. Then the actual Dinobots. Grimlock jumps out of the ground, Slug bites a car, and that's it. There's your Dinobots. No Scorn, who's obviously my favorite, and Spinosaurus, my favorite dinosaur. Strafe has 2 heads and 2 tails, and can fly. Just he can fly. And they weren't in here. None of the other Dinobots. There were leaks. I remember there were leaks and stuff, saying that we were gonna get more Dinobots, and I was like, oh yes, awesome. We're gonna get Slash. We're gonna get Slog, because those are like the most awesome, obvious ones. Snarl as well, where it's like, okay, obviously we're gonna get the whole team. Nope. In the movie, we only got half the team. So yeah, the Autobots and the Dinobots just were absolute garbage here. And then the Decepticons. Oh my god, how do you get worse than this Autobot team? I guess chuck in Cogman to the Autobots too, Headmaster, and they do nothing with it. I mean, he's a cool character. That move, bitch, get out of my way. Move, bitch, get out of my way. That stays in my head every single time when I'm on the roads. Like now that I am driving myself, I don't have my license yet, but now that I'm driving myself, every time when there is a slow ass motherfucker in front of me, I just think of that move, bitch, get out of my way. But anyway, moving on to the Decepticons. Starting off with Dreadbot. Dreadbot, he lasts like one scene. There really isn't much to talk about. It's literally just Crowbar's head chucked onto a new model, which, the Last Knight does that multiple times. They took like Leadfoot's head and put him on Topspin's body, and then you get Volleybot, apparently. And even Agent Simmons, I forgot he's in this movie. Francesco Bernoulli does nothing. He does nothing. Berserker. My first Transformers toy that was not a little gimmick figure was the deluxe class Berserker. And actually, today is the day that I got it. This day 8 years ago. And I walked into the cinema with it. I literally got it as I was about to go to the cinema, because there's a toy store just before the cinema. Well, not anymore. That cinema closed, but it used to be. And I got Berserker from there. And he didn't even do anything in the movie. He was such a cool design. And they did nothing with it. Onslaught, absolute waste, dies in like 10 seconds. Nitro Zeus just exists just to have someone on Megatron's side, like the knockoff Starscream. Barricade does nothing. His voice is way too humanoid, in my opinion. I much prefer the your username Leadman217 as opposed to I saw it. It's so disappointing. And then you get Megatron himself. Again, very disappointed that they not only did not continue with Galvatron, but that they bring back Megatron with no explanation whatsoever. Now, I will admit, I do still think that the Dark of the Moon version is my favorite design of Megatron from the Bayverse, but this design is metal as fuck. There are so many people who already praise this design so much simply because it's closer to G1. But anyway, his first transformation makes no sense whatsoever. The plane just disappears. But anyway, moving on from that, I love the tusks. I believe this is the design by the same guy who designed Ultron from Age of Ultron, which I watched this movie before I watched Age of Ultron. So when I saw Ultron, I was like, hey, that looks like Megatron from The Last Knight. But easily my favorite part about this design is the thing on the side of his head where he has like that engraving of his 2007 self sort of holding a sword and commanding an army. It's a very small detail which you can only see on the 3D model and in the movie when Megatron is turning his head in that alley and he's like, he's here. That's the only scene in the movie where you can see it, I believe. But yes, Megatron doesn't even get a conclusion in this movie. This movie was very much a middle chapter to a trilogy, and we never got the next movie because Megatron ends this movie with getting his arm cut off and then getting kicked out of the fucking planet. And while she's not a Decepticon, I will include her. Quintessa is probably the worst villain of this franchise. Megatron in the first movie was threatening as hell. The Fallen from Revenge of the Fallen was garbage, but he was voiced by Tony Todd and can fucking hell. He was voiced by Tony Todd and he can teleport. Sentinel Prime, absolutely hateable bastard with a phenomenal design. Lockdown, the coldest motherfucker in this entire franchise. Scourge, basically Lockdown. Shatter and Dropkick, awesome. Sentinel Prime, again, hateable. Then you get Quintessa, who just exists. I mean, she's hot. But genuinely, she is utter garbage. And I remember being so confused because I remember when I first watched this movie, I only knew that Unicron was a bad guy. I didn't know anything else about Unicron. But I just remember being like, wait, if she wants to kill Unicron, why are we supposed to be rooting against her? Even though she was trying to destroy Earth, the planet that we live on, I was still like, but Unicron's bad. So, yeah, whatever. I mean, she survived. One more thing I forgot to mention. I'm also going to add that the Optimus, the Nemesis versus Bumblebee fight, even though it ends in a stupid way of B just magically getting his voice back, that scene is cool, but they literally showed every single scene throughout the trailers. This movie had, I think, 9 trailers, or like 10 trailers. I think it had 9 trailers. It was ridiculous. So yeah, they really just spoiled way too much in the marketing. But really, apart from the characters, there isn't much to talk about with this movie because this is the first Transformers movie where you have a genuine, like, world-ending threat. The closest thing that we came to with this was the Fallen going to basically going to destroy the sun. And even then, that would have killed, yes, I mean, it would have killed all the life on the planet, but the planet would probably still exist. Cybertron literally coming into our atmosphere, or at least what's left of Cybertron from Dark of the Moon. I like that detail that Cybertron is like really small now, because obviously there's just little parts of it left from Dark of the Moon, and it destroys the Ark in this movie. But yeah, really, really big, high stakes here. And I actually do kind of like the final battle. It is very chaotic. There's a lot of aerial stuff going on, but I quite liked it. No, nowhere near the best final battle of this franchise, but it was good. Especially that like 5 second tussle between Bumblebee and Megatron. That's a fight I would always love to see more of, is B and Megatron. I don't know why, but I this is way before I watched Transformers Prime, by the way. When that history was given. Just from watching the movies, I always wanted Bumblebee to fight Megatron. But yeah, the story, it really isn't much to go on with this movie. So let's just skip to the ending, where, yes, Cybertron does not destroy Earth, but there are still parts of it left. And this is where we get, again, an ending that would have set up a great sequel. So basically, Quintessa is still alive. But we don't know that. So Quintessa would have been the villain again. Her clearly being able to, somewhat mind control people, and Unicron's horns were still rising. Which, by the way, love that they took inspiration from TFP. Of course, I only watched TFP in like 2023, but still, it's that's cool with Unicron being Earth. There was that, and then Optimus at the end, being like, calling all Autobots, whatever. It's time to come home. That it's basically like a different version of his '07 speech. When he's like, the message to all Autobots scattered across the stars: we're here, we're waiting. Except this time he says, "Come home." And also, his ending speech also says that, we could rebuild our worlds, indicating that Prime might actually have the incentive to fix Cybertron. So maybe the next movie, we literally could have had the biggest Transformers film yet. We would have had Megatron / Galvatron, depending on if they would have redone that storyline. We would have had Megatron and some amazing Decepticons. There's so many Decepticons from G1 that you could have picked, that haven't been in the Bayverse yet. You could have had all of them. Optimus, you could have had, I don't know why I said Optimus, Autobots, you could have had so many Autobots like Cliff Jumper, characters who weren't in the Bayverse again, and it would have just been this epic endgame level thing. And then, that movie would have probably ended with, Megatron and Prime working together and rebuilding Cybertron, and all the Transformers would go back to Cybertron. That would have been, well, obviously they would have killed Unicron, but man, that would have been so, so cool. I'd also just like to chuck in my one theory that I had when I was like 10, and that is of how Optimus was going to kill Galvatron. And that is him using the seed, which is never brought up again in this movie. It's just lost in space. So what I thought would have been cool is if Prime and Galvi were fighting, and the seed is obviously activated. Prime grabs the seed and throws it, and it goes through the hole in Galvatron's chest. But obviously, much like it grinded up Prime's sword, it would start grinding up the seed, and the seed would detonate. And this, of course, would destroy Galvatron, because him being able to sort of break apart would not help. So, I don't know, I feel like that would have been a really cool way to kill Galvatron. I always wanted that to be the case. But alas, we didn't get that. Hell, we didn't get Galvatron at all. Instead, we got Megatron back. Oh my god, I forgot about Vivian. I forgot about Vivian. She's basically what the entire movie revolves around. I forgot. Well, shows you that apart from her attractiveness, she really wasn't anything. And, just adding on to the final thing, which I will say about the human characters, Cade Yeager being the last knight is absolutely stupid. Terrible decision. I'm not going to acknowledge it anymore. But I just wanted to get this out there, because even though between the time I started this video and, now, it is now the 24th of June, but I just had to record my general thoughts on The Last Knight 8 years after it's released. And, even though it is a questionable movie, as much as I ragged on it in this video, when I'm actually watching it, it's not as painful, just because it takes me back. It takes me back to a time when we had hope for the Transformers franchise. And it's heartbreaking, because that is something that we just won't get anymore. Because, much like I said in the beginning, the movies now are just so sort of directionless. Like Bumblebee was a prequel, then it was a reboot, then you get to the actual movie, and it's like a mix of the two, because like, why would you have Bumblebee turn into that 77 Camaro if you didn't have the idea of connecting it to the Bayverse? So there's that. Then Rise the Beast, it's like Lorenzo wants it to be a prequel, but it's not going to be a prequel because it doesn't make any sense, because Unicron is, a separate thing. And also that movie was pretty average. Transformers 1, horrendously marketed, great movie, but flopped. Hasbro no longer funding the movies, Paramount not making a sequel to TF1. Many of us would beg for a Last Knight-esque era again. And I really wish that we could have gotten the end to this. Because there's a lot of fan films in production, of Transformers 6, yada, yada, yada. But this, along with The Amazing Spider-Man 3, if there was one movie that I could have chosen to be made, it would be Transformers 6. There's no question about it. So, yes, in conclusion, what I will say about Transformers The Last Knight is it is sort of a guilty pleasure, but it is a very disappointing sequel to Age of Extinction, especially as someone who loved Age of Extinction and the ending, of course. Disappointing sequel to Age of Extinction. Fantastic setup for the end of the trilogy, probably the end of that franchise. But ultimately, the movie itself just doesn't feel like much, and yet it still feels like heavier than Rise of the Beasts. So yeah, please, 8 years on, let me know what you guys thought of Transformers The Last Knight, not only when it came out, but what you think of it now. Are you less negative on it? Do you miss this era of Transformers? And, one last thing I will add on is I remember seeing all the figures for this line on the shelves, and I really, really miss that. We haven't gotten Transformers on these shelves in 5 years. So I really miss the Last Night era. But anyway, I am going to stop crying about these freaking things. Please let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video, then please leave a like, subscribe, and goodbye.